So Ted Cruz has had some crazy stuff to say lately. Hey, is it a day that ends in Y? Then Ted Cruz is saying some crazy stuff. Why do I bring it up instead of just ignore it? Because he's the number 3 candidate right now running for president in the GOP field. First, Donald Trump, crazy fascist, racist, maniac. Second is Ben Carson, a completely psychopathic, out of control, will say anything, uninformed on just about everything except the specifics of brain surgery. Number 3, Ted Cruz, one of the most monumental demagogues that we've seen, I gotta say, since McCarthy, who he happens to look exactly like. So after the Planned Parenthood shooting, Ted Cruz had this to say.
Every time you have some sort of violent crime or mass killing, you can almost see the media salivating, hoping desperately that the murderer happens to be a Republican so they can use it to try to paint their political enemies. Now, listen, here's the simple and undeniable fact. The overwhelming majority of violent criminals are Democrats. The media doesn't report that.
The media's not going to tell you that. You know why? Because it's fucking made up. Why doesn't the media report bullshit right-wing talking points that are completely made up like we report in the right-wing news bubble? I don't know why. Maybe because they don't like to report made-up shit. But they will repeat you saying that. So here's what Ted Cruz was basing that statement on, that most violent felons are Democrats as opposed to Republicans, which is amazing. First of all, the news media doesn't go, I hope it's a Republican so we can report it. The news media is hoping, wishing, praying to God above, their Christian God above, that whoever is doing a violent crime is a Muslim terrorist, because that jacks ratings through the roof. That's why they showed us all the beheadings of the ISIS videos. Remember those? Why would they show us those? Oh, to scare the shit out of us, so then we'll be okay with our endless war in the Middle East, okay? So Ted Cruz says that the news media hopes it's a Republican. So they're not. They hope it's a Muslim terrorist, because that does well for ratings. Number 2, he's getting this from a paper that was published by a couple of brainiacs at Harvard, Meredith and Morth. Here it is. Meredith and Morth, they had a 2014 paper that looked into whether state laws that notify ex-felons about their voting rights had any effect on those individuals' likelihood of re-registering to vote and turning out to the polls. So that's what that paper looked into, about whether the laws that notify ex-felons about their voting rights had any effect on them. That was what it looked into. So Ted Cruz cites that paper as saying, hey, these guys said that more Democrats commit violent crime. So here's what the authors of the study say. Of course, they don't agree with Ted Cruz. They say that the studies show that only about 20% of ex-felons in each state are registered to vote anyway. And so you can't really extrapolate that violent criminals are overwhelmingly Democratic when you lack identification of the 80% that aren't registered to vote. And what's more, the paper cited is a series of papers in which Meredith, he says this is him talking, the author of the study, we have combined public records from departments of correction, states, courts, secretaries of state to directly measure ex-felons' party registration and turnout history. But our research does not support Ted Cruz's claim. You're kidding. The people who wrote the paper that Ted Cruz is citing for his crazy statistic about Democrats being, that they say it doesn't support that? That's amazing. And why doesn't the media report his unbiased? Because it's not true. It's made up. The authors of the study just said it's not true. What are the true crime stats? 60% of all violent crimes are committed by white men and women. So there's that stat. Also, in that paper that Ted Cruz cited for the stats he threw out, he literally cited that paper. In that paper, it says, quote, the authors note people convicted of violent crimes aren't more likely to identify as democratic than nonviolent offenders. The paper concludes that not more likely to be Democrats than Republicans. So the paper says that. So that's it's the beauty that Ted Cruz does that. A, he's the victim. Again, Republicans are always the victim of the mass media. If there's one thing we know about rich white males in America who are Christian, they are always the victims of everything. They're the victim of mainstream society, mainstream news media, even though it's owned by them and it's run for them. They're somehow the victim. So that's the beauty. Ted Cruz making shit up again. Thanks, Ted.